At the start of a bustling morning, the station trembles under the weight of footsteps and metallic announcements. A silver-haired lady in her wheelchair moves to the edge of the platform, clutching her bag to her body. The sudden shove of an anonymous man sends her hurtling straight onto the tracks. The muffled rumble of the train approaches fast, drowning out the shouts of the crowd. But a police horse appears, black and nimble, its eyes fixed on the scene. As the animal moves forward, the lady falls to her side, just inches from the vibrating rails. And for a second, everything stopped. Love stories with animals? Then subscribe now and don't miss any. Thank you for following us. Now let's get back to our story. The morning rush at Union Station in Washington, D.C. was in full swing, with hurried footsteps echoing across the marble floors and announcements reverberating through the speakers. Among the crowd, Eleanor Thompson navigated her wheelchair with the same dignified posture she had maintained for the past 3 years, since the accident that had changed her life forever. Her silver hair was neatly pulled back, and despite her physical limitations, she carried herself with an elegance that commanded respect from those who knew her. Eleanor had made this journey dozens of times before, taking the early train to visit her daughter, Jessica, in Baltimore. At 72, she refused to let her condition limit her independence, much to her family's concern. But today felt different. There was an unsettling energy in the air that made her grip the armrests of her wheelchair a little tighter than usual. As she maneuvered through the bustling terminal, Eleanor couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched. Her keen eyes, sharpened by years of teaching high school English before her retirement, scanned the faces around her. Most people were absorbed in their phones or lost in their own morning routines, but one figure caught her attention. A tall man in a dark coat stood near Platform B, seemingly waiting for a train, yet his gaze kept returning to her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. Eleanor tried to dismiss the thought as paranoia. Living alone had made her more cautious, perhaps overly so. She adjusted her grip on her handbag, a leather purse that had been a gift from her late husband Harold, and continued toward her usual spot near the platform where the Baltimore train would arrive. The wheels of her chair moved smoothly across the polished floor until she reached the yellow safety line. From her seated position, she could see the digital board announcing that her train would arrive in approximately 8 minutes. Perfect timing, as always. Eleanor prided herself on punctuality, a habit ingrained from her decades in the classroom. But as she positioned herself to wait, something felt wrong with her wheelchair. The left wheel seemed to wobble slightly, as if a bolt had come loose. She frowned, remembering how her neighbor Robert Henderson had just serviced the chair last week. Robert was always so helpful, stopping by to check on her and offering to maintain her equipment. It was unusual for something to malfunction so soon after his careful attention. Eleanor leaned forward to examine the wheel more closely when she felt a presence behind her. Before she could turn around, a sudden, forceful push sent her wheelchair rolling toward the edge of the platform. The safety barrier seemed impossibly far away as momentum carried her forward, and for a terrifying moment, she could see the dark pit of the railway tracks below. Panic seized her chest as the sound of an approaching train grew louder. The massive headlight cut through the morning shadows in the distance, and she could hear the rumble of tons of steel bearing down on the station. Around her, voices erupted in alarm. Someone screamed, others shouted for help. The cacophony of panic filled the air as Eleanor's wheelchair continued its dangerous trajectory toward the platform's edge. Then, like something out of a movie, a magnificent black horse appeared, its rider guiding it with expert precision through the crowd. Officer Marcus Rivera had been patrolling the station as part of the Metropolitan Police Department's mounted unit, something that had become more common in major transportation hubs following recent security concerns. His horse, Thunder, was a 7-year-old Frisian with an impressive build and remarkable intelligence. In one fluid motion, Officer Rivera directed Thunder to intercept Eleanor's path. The horse's powerful frame created a barrier, while Rivera leaned down and grabbed the handles of the wheelchair, bringing it to a halt just feet from the platform's edge. The approaching train's horn blared as it began its routine deceleration into the station, completely unaware of how close disaster had come. Eleanor's heart pounded as she looked up at her rescuer. Officer Rivera was a man in his early 40s, with kind eyes and graying temples that spoke of years of service. Thunder snorted and stepped back, his dark coat gleaming under the terminal's lights as if he understood the gravity of what had just occurred. "Ma'am, are you all right?" Officer Rivera asked, his voice steady but concerned. He dismounted Thunder and crouched down to Eleanor's eye level, checking for any signs of injury. Yes, I think so," Eleanor replied, her voice shaky. "Thank you. I don't know what happened. Someone pushed me, but..." She looked back toward where she had been waiting, but the crowd had shifted and she couldn't identify who might have been responsible. Officer Rivera's expression grew serious. "Someone pushed you? Did you see who it was?" Eleanor shook her head, frustrated by her inability to provide more information. "There was a man in a dark coat who had been watching me, but I didn't see him when it happened. It came from behind." As Officer Rivera helped secure Eleanor's wheelchair and ensured she was stable, Thunder remained close, as if sensing the woman's distress. The horse's presence was oddly comforting, and Eleanor found herself reaching out to touch his neck. Thunder lowered his head gently, allowing the contact. "We should file a report," Officer Rivera said. "Even if it seemed accidental, I want to document what happened. Sometimes patterns emerge that we don't see at first." Eleanor nodded, though part of her wondered if she was overreacting. Perhaps someone had simply bumped into her accidentally in the crowded station, but the force of that push had been so deliberate, so targeted, she couldn't shake the feeling that it had been intentional. As they moved away from the platform edge, Eleanor reached into her handbag to retrieve her identification. For the report, her fingers found her wallet, her reading glasses, and her small notebook where she kept her daily reminders. But there was something else, something that hadn't been there before. Her fingers closed around a small piece of paper, folded tightly. With trembling hands, she unfolded the note. The message was brief but chilling. "This is just the beginning. Stop asking questions about the Riverside incident, or next time you won't be so lucky." Eleanor's blood ran cold. The Riverside incident. She hadn't spoken to anyone about that but surely not. Her mind raced back to the conversation she'd had just 2 weeks ago with her old friend Margaret Sullivan about the strange circumstances surrounding their mutual friend Dorothy's accident at the Riverside Park last month. Dorothy had fallen down the stairs at the community center, and while everyone accepted it as a tragic accident, Eleanor had noticed some inconsistencies in the official story. Officer Rivera noticed her pale complexion. "Mrs. Thompson, what is it?" Eleanor looked up at him, then at Thunder, who seemed to be watching her with unusual intelligence. "Officer, I think what happened today wasn't random, and I think it might be connected to something bigger." She handed him the note, and as he read it, his expression darkened. "Ma'am, this changes everything. We need to take this very seriously." The morning had started as routine as any other, but Eleanor Thompson now found herself at the center of something she didn't fully understand. As Officer Rivera radioed for additional support and began the process of documenting the incident, Eleanor couldn't help but feel that her life had just taken a dramatic turn. The man in the dark coat had disappeared into the crowd, but the message was clear. Someone wanted her silenced, and they were willing to go to dangerous lengths to achieve it. Thunder nudged her shoulder gently with his muzzle, and Eleanor felt a strange sense of connection to the animal. Perhaps it was intuition, or maybe just desperation, but she had the distinct feeling that this horse would play a crucial role in whatever was to come. The station continued to buzz with activity around them, commuters rushing to catch their trains, but Eleanor's world had shifted into something entirely different. As Officer Rivera finished his preliminary report and arrangements were made to escort Eleanor home safely, she realized that her simple trip to visit her daughter had become the beginning of something much more complex. The note in her purse felt like it was burning a hole through the leather, and questions began flooding her mind. Who had placed it there? How did they know about her conversations with Margaret? And most importantly, what really happened to Dorothy at Riverside Park? The train to Baltimore departed without her that morning, but Eleanor Thompson's real journey was just beginning. The ride home to Georgetown was tense, with Officer Rivera following Eleanor's wheelchair-accessible van in his patrol car, while Thunder was transported separately back to the station. Eleanor's mind raced as she stared out the window at the familiar tree-lined streets of her neighborhood. The elegant row houses with their federal-style architecture had been her home for over 4 decades, but now even these familiar surroundings felt somehow threatening. Mrs. Patterson, her regular transportation service driver, kept glancing at Eleanor through the rearview mirror. "You sure you're okay, Mrs. Thompson? You seem shaken up." "I'm fine, dear. Just a long morning," Eleanor replied, though her hands hadn't stopped, trembling since the incident at Union Station. She clutched her handbag tighter, the mysterious note still tucked inside like a piece of evidence from a crime she didn't fully understand yet. When they arrived at her modest 2-story townhouse on N Street, Officer Rivera was already waiting on her front porch. He helped her up the wheelchair ramp that Robert Henderson had installed last year, another example of her neighbor's thoughtfulness that now seemed to take on a different meaning. "Mrs. Thompson, I'd like to do a quick sweep of your home, if that's all right with you," Officer Rivera said as Eleanor unlocked her front door. "After what happened today, I want to make sure everything is secure." Eleanor nodded, grateful for his thoroughness. As they entered her living room, filled with decades of memories and carefully arranged furniture to accommodate her wheelchair, she noticed something immediately wrong. The small ceramic elephant that always sat on her coffee table, a souvenir from her honeymoon in Thailand with Harold, was missing. "That's odd," she murmured, scanning the room more carefully. "I could have sworn I left that elephant right there yesterday evening." Officer Rivera made a note in his small pad. "Anything else seem out of place?" Eleanor moved through her home systematically. In the kitchen, her favorite coffee mug was sitting in the sink, though she distinctly remembered washing it and putting it away the night before. Upstairs, her bedroom door was slightly ajar when she always kept it closed. Small details that individually meant nothing, but together painted a disturbing picture. "Officer Rivera," Eleanor called from the bottom of the stairs. "I think someone has been in my house." Over the next hour, Officer Rivera conducted a thorough investigation while Eleanor sat in her living room, trying to process everything that had happened. The missing elephant, the displaced items, the wheelchair malfunction, and that terrifying note all swirled together in her mind like pieces of a puzzle she couldn't quite assemble. "Mrs. Thompson, I'm going to increase patrols in this area," Officer Rivera said as he finished his inspection, "and I want you to have my direct number. If anything, and I mean anything, feels wrong, you call me immediately." After Officer Rivera left, Eleanor found herself alone with her thoughts for the first time that day. She made a cup of tea and positioned herself by the front window where she could observe the quiet street. Georgetown in the early afternoon was peaceful, with joggers making their way along the tree-lined sidewalks and the occasional dog walker passing by. That's when she noticed Robert Henderson working in his garden directly across the street. Robert was retired like herself, a former accountant who had moved to the neighborhood about 2 years ago. He had been nothing but kind and helpful, especially after Harold's passing. But now, as she watched him tend to his roses, Eleanor found herself studying his movements with new suspicion. Around 3 o'clock, Margaret Sullivan arrived for their weekly tea date. Margaret had been Eleanor's closest friend since their days volunteering at the Kennedy Center, and their friendship had only grown stronger after both of their husbands passed away within a year of each other. Margaret was a petite woman with curly auburn hair and laugh lines that spoke of a life filled with joy, despite her recent losses. "Ellie, darling, you look pale," Margaret said as she settled into the wingback chair across from Eleanor. "How was your trip to see Jessica?" "I never made it to Baltimore," Eleanor replied, and proceeded to tell Margaret everything that had happened at Union Station. She watched her friend's face carefully as she described the incident, looking for any reaction that might seem unusual. Margaret's shock appeared genuine. "My goodness, Ellie, you could have been seriously hurt. Thank heaven for that police officer and his horse. Margaret, do you remember our conversation about Dorothy's accident at Riverside Park?" Margaret's expression shifted slightly, though Eleanor couldn't quite read the change. "Of course I remember. Poor Dorothy. But what does that have to do with what happened to you today?" Eleanor pulled out the note and showed it to her friend. Margaret's face went white as she read the words. "Ellie, this is terrifying. You need to stop whatever investigation you think you're conducting and let the police handle it." "But that's just it, Margaret. The police ruled Dorothy's fall an accident. No one is investigating anything." "Maybe that's because there's nothing to investigate," Margaret said quickly. "Sometimes accidents really are just accidents, even if they seem suspicious to those of us who cared about the person involved." Eleanor studied her friend's face. Margaret was nervous, more nervous than the situation seemed to warrant. "You think I should just forget about Dorothy and pretend nothing happened today? I think you should be very careful, Ellie. Whatever this is, it's clearly dangerous." After Margaret left, Eleanor felt more isolated than ever. The afternoon stretched endlessly before her, and every small sound in the house made her jump. Around 5 o'clock, she decided to check her wheelchair more thoroughly. In her garage, she examined the left wheel that had been wobbling earlier. What she found made her stomach drop. The bolt that secured the wheel wasn't simply loose, it showed signs of deliberate tampering. The threads were slightly stripped, as if someone had partially loosened it and then tightened it just enough to hold temporarily. It was subtle, the kind of sabotage that would cause a malfunction at the worst possible moment. Eleanor's hands shook as she realized the implications. Someone had been in her garage, had access to her personal space, and had deliberately weakened her wheelchair. The incident at Union Station hadn't been a random act of violence. It had been a carefully planned attempt to harm her. She wheeled back into her house and immediately called the number Officer Rivera had given her. He answered on the second ring. "Officer Rivera, it's Eleanor Thompson. I found something. My wheelchair was sabotaged." "I'll be right there, Mrs. Thompson. Don't touch anything else." While waiting for Officer Rivera to return, Eleanor's mind went back to her conversation with Margaret about Dorothy's accident. Dorothy Williams had been 81 years old, a sharp and independent woman who lived alone in a senior community near Riverside Park. She had fallen down the concrete stairs leading to the community center's main entrance on a Tuesday morning in early October. The official report stated that she had likely tripped on her own feet, a common occurrence among elderly residents. But Eleanor remembered details that bothered her. Dorothy had been wearing her new walking shoes that day, shoes with excellent grip that she had bought specifically to prevent falls. The weather had been clear and dry. Most puzzling of all, Dorothy had called Eleanor just the night before her accident, expressing concern about some inconsistencies she had noticed in the community's financial records. Dorothy had been the treasurer of the Residents' Association and prided herself on her attention to detail. "I think someone might be skimming money from our maintenance fund," Dorothy had whispered over the phone. "The numbers don't add up, Ellie. I'm going to bring it up at tomorrow's meeting." But Dorothy never made it to that meeting. Her accident happened just hours before it was scheduled to begin. When Officer Rivera arrived with Thunder in tow, Eleanor felt an immediate sense of relief. There was something about the horse's presence that made her feel safer. Thunder was even more impressive up close, his black coat gleaming in the late afternoon sun, his intelligent eyes seeming to assess the situation. "Show me what you found," Officer Rivera said, and Eleanor led him to the garage. Officer Rivera examined the wheelchair wheel with the trained eye of someone who had seen sabotage before. "Mrs. Thompson, this was definitely tampered with. Someone wanted this wheel to fail, probably when you were in motion. So the incident at the station was likely attempted assault, at minimum. Someone orchestrated this very carefully." Officer Rivera took photos of the damaged wheel and collected it as evidence. "Mrs. Thompson, I need you to think carefully. Who has had access to your garage recently? Who knew about your travel plans today?" Eleanor considered the question. "My neighbor, Robert Henderson, has a spare key. He's helped me with maintenance and yard work since Harold passed. My friend Margaret knew about my trip to Baltimore. My daughter Jessica, of course. And," she paused, trying to remember, "I mentioned it to the ladies at my book club last week, and probably to Dr. Palmer. At my last appointment, I want you to make a complete list of everyone who might have known your schedule or had access to your home," Officer Rivera said. "And Mrs. Thompson, I'm going to recommend that Thunder and I increase our patrols in this area. We'll be keeping a close eye on things." As if understanding his name, Thunder moved closer to Eleanor's wheelchair. She reached out tentatively and stroked his neck. The horse's warmth and solid presence provided a comfort she hadn't expected. "He likes you," Officer Rivera observed with a slight smile. "Thunder is usually more reserved with strangers. He has good instincts about people." That evening, as Eleanor prepared for bed, she couldn't escape the feeling that her life had fundamentally changed. The woman who had woken up that morning planning a simple visit to her daughter was now at the center of what appeared to be a deliberate campaign of intimidation. But why? What did someone think she knew or might discover? She thought again about Dorothy's phone call, about the financial discrepancies in the senior community's records. Had Dorothy stumbled onto something bigger than simple embezzlement? And if so, who would go to such lengths to silence an elderly woman's concerns? Eleanor locked her doors more carefully than usual that night and positioned her wheelchair near her bedroom window where she could see the street. Around midnight, she noticed a figure walking slowly past her house, pausing to look up at her windows before moving on. The person was too far away to identify in the darkness, but their deliberate pace and obvious interest in her home confirmed her worst fears. Someone was watching her, planning their next move. But Eleanor Thompson had survived 7 decades of life's challenges, from raising 3 children as a working mother to caring for Harold through his long illness. She wasn't about to be intimidated into silence now. If someone thought they could frighten her into abandoning her questions about Dorothy's accident, they had seriously underestimated her determination. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Eleanor's last conscious thought was of Thunder's intelligent eyes and Officer Rivera's promise to increase patrols. Tomorrow, she would begin her own investigation into what really happened at Riverside Park. Eleanor woke to the sound of Thunder's hoofbeats on the cobblestone street outside her window. The morning patrols had begun earlier than usual, and She felt a wave of gratitude knowing Officer Rivera was taking her situation seriously. Sunlight streamed through her lace curtains, but the cheerful autumn day couldn't dispel the anxiety that had settled in her chest like a permanent weight. After her morning routine, Eleanor decided to visit the Riverside Senior Community, where Dorothy had lived. If someone was trying to silence her questions about Dorothy's accident, then perhaps there were answers to be found among Dorothy's former neighbors and friends. She called for a ride service, specifically requesting a driver she didn't know, a precaution that would have seemed paranoid just days ago. The Riverside Community was a well-maintained complex of low-rise buildings nestled along the Potomac River, about 20 minutes from Eleanor's Georgetown home. As her wheelchair moved through the main lobby, Eleanor was struck by how quiet and subdued the atmosphere felt. Normally, the common areas buzzed with activity and conversation, but today, residents seemed to hurry past each other with minimal interaction. Eleanor's first stop was the administrative office, where she hoped to speak with someone about Dorothy's final days. The receptionist, a young woman with tired eyes named Jennifer, recognized Eleanor immediately. "Mrs. Thompson, I remember you from Dorothy's memorial service. Such a lovely woman. We all miss her terribly." "That's actually why I'm here, Jennifer. I wanted to ask a few questions about Dorothy's accident, if you don't mind." Jennifer's expression became guarded. "Oh, well, I'm not sure I'm the right person to talk to about that. It was very straightforward, really. Poor Dorothy fell down the stairs. The paramedics said it happens more often than people realize with residents her age." "Were you working that morning when it happened?" "No, it was my day off. But Mr. Phillips, our maintenance supervisor, was here. He's the one who found her." Eleanor made a mental note to speak with Mr. Phillips. "Jennifer, had Dorothy seemed upset or worried about anything in the days before her accident?" The young woman hesitated, glancing around the office as if checking to see if anyone was listening. "Well, Dorothy had been asking a lot of questions about our budget reports lately. She came in here several times wanting to see expense records and contractor payments. But that was just Dorothy being Dorothy, you know. She was very detail-oriented. Did she find anything unusual?" "I really shouldn't speculate," Jennifer said quickly. "If you want to know more about Dorothy's concerns, you might talk to Mrs. Chen. She's been asking similar questions lately." Eleanor's interest was immediately piqued. "Mrs. Chen?" "Dr. Sarah Chen. She moved into Building C about 6 months ago. She's some kind of financial analyst, recently retired. Very smart lady. She and Dorothy became friends because they both enjoyed working with numbers." Eleanor thanked Jennifer and made her way to Building C. Dr. Sarah Chen turned out to be a woman in her early 60s with sharp, intelligent eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Her apartment was spotlessly organized, with stacks of financial documents neatly arranged on her dining room table. "You're asking about Dorothy," Dr. Chen said, after Eleanor introduced herself. "I've been hoping someone would. That woman didn't fall down those stairs by accident." Eleanor's heart rate quickened. "What makes you say that?" "Dorothy was one of the most careful people I've ever met. She always used the handrail, always watched her step, and those stairs, she'd been walking up and down them for 15 years. Plus, she had told me just the day before that she had discovered some very interesting discrepancies in the community's financial records." Dr. Chen invited Eleanor to sit at her dining table, where she spread out copies of financial documents. "Dorothy had been investigating for weeks before she approached me. Look at these contractor payments." Eleanor studied the papers. Even with her limited understanding of financial analysis, she could see what had caught Dorothy's attention. Payments to various maintenance companies seemed inflated, and several of the contractor names appeared to be variations of each other. Henderson Property Services, Henderson Maintenance LLC, R. Henderson Contracting, Eleanor read aloud. "These all seem to be connected to someone named Henderson. Exactly what Dorothy thought. And when we looked up these companies, most of them are registered to the same address. Dorothy had planned to present this information to the board of directors. Eleanor felt a chill run down her spine. Henderson, my neighbor's name is Robert Henderson. Dr. Chen looked up sharply. Your neighbor? He's been so helpful since my husband passed. He maintains my wheelchair, helps with repairs around the house. Eleanor's voice trailed off as the implications began to sink in. Mrs. Thompson, if your neighbor is involved in embezzling money from senior communities and you've been asking questions about Dorothy's accident, you could be in serious danger. As if summoned by their conversation, Eleanor's phone rang. The caller ID showed Robert Henderson's number. Ellie, I just heard about what happened at Union Station this morning. Are you all right? His voice sounded genuinely concerned, but Eleanor now heard something else underneath the worry. I'm fine, Robert. Just shaken up. I was wondering if you'd like me to come over and check your wheelchair again. Sometimes these mechanical failures happen in clusters, you know. Better to be safe. Eleanor's grip tightened on the phone. Actually, the police have my wheelchair for examination right now, but thank you for offering. There was a brief pause. On the other end, the police. Ellie, you don't think someone sabotaged your chair, do you? That seems a bit paranoid. The word paranoid stung, but Eleanor kept her voice steady. I'm just being cautious, Robert. After she hung up, Dr. Chen was watching her with concern. That was him, wasn't it? The Henderson from these financial records? Eleanor nodded, feeling the weight of betrayal settling over her. Robert had been in her home countless times, had access to her garage, knew her schedule, and had serviced her wheelchair just days before the malfunction. If he was embezzling money from senior communities, Dorothy's investigation would have eventually exposed him. Dr. Chen, I need to ask you something important. Have you shared your findings about these financial discrepancies with anyone else? Just with Dorothy, and now with you. I've been debating whether to take it to the authorities, but I wanted to be absolutely certain of my facts first. I think you should be very careful about who you trust, Eleanor said. Someone tried to push me in front of a train this morning because of questions I asked about Dorothy's accident. Dr. Chen's eyes widened. Then we need to document everything and get this to the proper authorities immediately. They spent the next 2 hours making copies of all the financial documents and creating a detailed timeline of events. Dr. Chen's analytical mind helped Eleanor organize her thoughts and suspicions into a coherent picture. By the time Eleanor left Riverside Community, they had established a plan to meet again the following day to review additional records. The ride home felt different now. Eleanor found herself studying every person on the sidewalk, every car that seemed to follow the same route as her van. When she arrived at her house, she noticed Officer Rivera and Thunder stationed at the corner, their presence providing a measure of comfort in her increasingly unstable world. That evening, Eleanor attempted to prepare dinner, but her concentration was shattered by every small noise. Around 7 o'clock, her landline rang. The caller ID showed an unknown number. Hello, Eleanor. The voice was electronically disguised, gender and age impossible to determine. I see you visited Riverside today. That wasn't very smart. Eleanor's blood ran cold, but she forced herself to respond calmly. Who is this? Someone who knows you've been asking the wrong questions and visiting the wrong people. Dr. Chen is a lovely woman. It would be unfortunate if something happened to her because of your meddling. If you hurt her, then stop digging into matters that don't concern you. Dorothy Williams fell down the stairs. Accept it and move on with your life. The line went dead, leaving Eleanor staring at the phone in her trembling hand. The caller had known about her visit to Dr. Chen within hours of it happening. Someone was monitoring her movements, her contacts, perhaps even her conversations. Eleanor immediately called Officer Rivera's direct number. "They called me," she said without preamble when he answered. "Someone threatened Dr. Chen. I'm on my way." Within minutes, Eleanor could hear Thunder's approach. Officer Rivera arrived at her door looking grim and determined. "Mrs. Thompson, we're past the point of treating this as isolated incidents. Someone is orchestrating a campaign of intimidation, and they're escalating. What do I do?" "First, we're going to ensure Dr. Chen's safety. Then we're going to set up proper surveillance and get to the bottom of this." As Officer Rivera made calls to arrange protection for Dr. Chen, Eleanor sat in her living room, staring at the empty space where her ceramic elephant had always sat. The missing keepsake now seemed like more than simple theft. It felt like a psychological message, a way of telling her that her most personal spaces weren't safe. Outside her window, Thunder stood alert in the growing darkness, his ears pricked forward as if listening for danger. The horse had become more than just a patrol animal. He was becoming Eleanor's guardian, a living symbol of hope in a situation that grew more threatening by the hour. Eleanor's phone rang again, this time showing Margaret's number. She hesitated before answering, uncertain who she could trust anymore. "Ellie, I've been thinking about our conversation today." Margaret's voice sounded strained. "Maybe you're right to be asking questions about Dorothy, but I'm worried about you. This seems very dangerous." "Margaret, I need to ask you something directly. Do you know Robert Henderson beyond just being my neighbor?" The pause on the other end of the line stretched too long. "Ellie, why would you ask that?" "Because someone is trying very hard to stop me from investigating Dorothy's accident, and Robert has had access to my home and my wheelchair." "I think you should be very careful about making accusations without proof," Margaret said finally. "Robert has been nothing but kind to you." After Margaret hung up, Eleanor realized that her circle of trusted friends was shrinking rapidly. But she also understood that she was closer to the truth than ever before, and someone was growing desperate enough to take increasingly dangerous risks to silence her. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor to Eleanor's door. Dr. Sarah. Chen stood on her front porch, her usually composed demeanor replaced by obvious anxiety. Dark circles under her eyes suggested she had slept as poorly as Eleanor. "Mrs. Thompson, we need to talk," Dr. Chen said, glancing nervously over her shoulder. "Someone broke into my apartment last night." Eleanor's heart sank as she invited Dr. Chen inside. "What did they take?" "Nothing, as far as I can tell. But they went through everything, including my financial analysis of the Riverside community records. My filing cabinet was opened, papers were scattered, and my computer had been accessed." They settled in Eleanor's living room, where Dr. Chen continued her account. "But here's what's really disturbing. When I got home from the police station this morning, I found this on my kitchen counter." She handed Eleanor a note similar to the one found in her handbag at Union Station. This one read, "Your friendship with Eleanor Thompson is hazardous. To your health, distance yourself immediately." "They're trying to isolate me," Eleanor realized. "Cut me off from anyone who might help or corroborate what I've discovered." "There's more," Dr. Chen said. "I did some research last night before the break-in. Robert Henderson isn't just running a few fake contracting companies. He's been systematically targeting senior communities across the greater DC area for the past 3 years. The pattern is always the same. He establishes himself as a helpful neighbor or service provider, gains access to community financial systems, then creates shell companies to inflate maintenance costs. Eleanor's mind reeled. But what does that have to do with individual people like Dorothy and me? When residents get suspicious and start investigating, they tend to have accidents. I found records of at least 4 other elderly people in different communities who died or were seriously injured shortly after raising questions about financial irregularities. The full scope of Robert's operation was becoming clear. This wasn't just embezzlement, it was a calculated scheme that eliminated threats through what appeared to be tragic accidents. "Dr. Chen, you need to stay away from your apartment," Eleanor said. "And we need to get this information to Officer Rivera immediately." As if summoned by their conversation, the familiar sound of hoofbeats approached Eleanor's house. Through the window, she could see Thunder and Officer Rivera making their morning patrol round. Eleanor waved from her window, and Officer Rivera guided Thunder to her front door. "Mrs. Thompson, how are you feeling this morning?" Officer Rivera asked as Eleanor opened the door. He noticed Dr. Chen immediately. "Dr. Chen, isn't it? From the Riverside community?" "Officer, you need to hear what Dr. Chen has discovered," Eleanor said. They gathered around Eleanor's dining room table as Dr. Chen laid out her research. Officer Rivera studied the documents with growing concern, occasionally asking for clarification on specific details. Thunder remained outside, but positioned himself where he could see through the front window, his alert posture suggesting he was standing guard. "This is extensive," Officer Rivera said after reviewing everything. "Dr. Chen, you've uncovered what appears to be a multi-year fraud operation targeting vulnerable seniors. But the pattern you've identified regarding accidents and injuries is particularly troubling." "What can we do?" Eleanor asked. "If Robert is behind this, he has access to my home. He knows my routine better than almost anyone." "First, we're changing all your locks today," Officer Rivera said. "Second, I'm coordinating with the Financial Crimes Division to begin a formal investigation into these shell companies. And third, we're going to set up a more comprehensive protection protocol." Dr. Chen shifted uncomfortably in her chair. "Officer Rivera, there's something else. I think Robert Henderson might not be working alone." Eleanor felt her stomach tighten. "What do you mean?" "Some of the financial transfers I traced required access to internal community management systems. Someone on the inside at each facility would have needed to approve or overlook these transactions." Officer Rivera leaned forward. "You're suggesting there's a network of accomplices?" "I think Robert identifies financial managers or board members at each community who can be bought or coerced into cooperation. In Dorothy's case, I believe she discovered not just the fake companies, but also who was helping from the inside." Eleanor's mind immediately went to Margaret's strange reaction when they had discussed Dorothy's concerns. Margaret had been treasurer of the Riverside Community Board for 2 years before stepping down just months before Dorothy's accident. "I think I know who the inside person was at Riverside," Eleanor said quietly, "and I think she's been monitoring my investigation from the beginning." Officer Rivera's radio crackled to life, interrupting the conversation. There was an emergency at another senior community across town, something about suspicious activity and potential financial irregularities. The pattern was expanding even as they spoke. "I have to respond to this call," Officer Rivera said, "but I don't want to leave you two unprotected." "What if we came with you?" Eleanor suggested. "If this is connected to Robert's operation, we might be able to provide insight." Against his better judgment, Officer Rivera agreed. The 3 of them made their way to the Potomac Heights Senior Living Facility, with Thunder and Officer Rivera leading the way and Eleanor and Dr. Chen following in the van with a police escort. Potomac Heights was in chaos when they arrived. Residents gathered in small groups, whispering anxiously to each other while staff members tried to maintain order. The facility director, a harried-looking man named David Walsh, met them at the main entrance. "Officer Rivera, thank goodness, you're here. We've had a very disturbing morning. Our financial manager, Ellen Rodriguez, was found unconscious in her office this morning. She appears to have fallen and hit her head, but before the incident, she had called our main office saying she had discovered some serious irregularities in our contractor payments." Eleanor and Dr. Chen exchanged meaningful looks. The pattern was repeating itself in real time. "Where is Ms. Rodriguez now?" Officer Rivera asked. "She's at Georgetown University Hospital. She's conscious now, but she's been asking to speak with law enforcement. She says she has something important to report about fraudulent contracts." Officer Rivera immediately radioed for backup and arranged for additional protection for Ellen Rodriguez at the hospital. Meanwhile, Eleanor and Dr. Chen were allowed to examine the financial records that had prompted Ellen's concerns. "Look." At this, Dr. Chen whispered, pointing to a series of payments. "Henderson Property Services, again, and these approval signatures, they're all from the same person." Eleanor studied the signatures. They appeared to be from someone named M. Sullivan, listed as a consulting financial advisor. "Margaret," Eleanor breathed. "Margaret Sullivan." The pieces were falling into place with devastating clarity. Margaret hadn't just been monitoring Eleanor's investigation. She had been an active participant in Robert's scheme from the beginning. Her role as former treasurer at Riverside Community had given her the access needed to approve fraudulent payments, and her friendship with Eleanor had provided the perfect way to track any threats to their operation. "We need to warn Officer Rivera," Dr. Chen said, but before Eleanor could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Look outside." Eleanor and Dr. Chen moved to the window of Ellen Rodriguez's office, which faced the facility's parking lot. There, standing next to Eleanor's van, was Margaret Sullivan. She wasn't trying to hide. Instead, she was looking directly up at the window where they stood, her expression cold and calculating. "She knows we're here," Eleanor said, her voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Chen was already calling Officer Rivera when Margaret began walking toward the building's main entrance. "She's coming inside." Eleanor felt panic rising in her chest, but then she heard the unmistakable sound of Thunder's hooves on the pavement outside. Through the window, she could see Officer Rivera guiding the powerful horse around the building's perimeter, clearly searching for something or someone. Margaret must have seen him too, because she abruptly changed direction and walked quickly back toward the parking lot. But instead of leaving, she positioned herself near a large delivery truck that blocked the view from the street, pulled out her phone, and made a call. "She's coordinating with someone," Dr. Chen observed. "This is definitely not a solo operation." Within minutes, a maintenance van pulled into the parking lot and Robert Henderson stepped out. Even from a distance, Eleanor could see him talking animatedly with Margaret, their body language suggesting urgency and frustration. Officer Rivera must have spotted them because Thunder suddenly appeared around the corner of the building, moving at a controlled gallop toward the parking lot. But Robert and Margaret were already getting into their respective vehicles, clearly intending to leave before they could be intercepted. "They're running," Eleanor said. But Thunder was faster. The magnificent horse positioned himself between the two vehicles and the parking lot exit, while Officer Rivera called for backup. Margaret's sedan came to a sudden stop just feet from Thunder, who stood his ground with remarkable courage. Eleanor watched from the window as Officer Rivera dismounted and approached Margaret's car. The conversation was brief but intense, and Eleanor could see Margaret's animated gestures through the windshield. Robert, meanwhile, had remained in his van, seemingly weighing his options. Dr. Chen was documenting everything on her phone, taking photos and recording video of the confrontation. "We're witnessing the exposure of a criminal network in real time," she said. The situation escalated quickly when Robert suddenly gunned his van's engine and tried to maneuver around Thunder. But the horse seemed to anticipate the move, pivoting to maintain his blocking position with an intelligence that amazed Eleanor. Officer Rivera shouted commands while radioing for immediate backup. Margaret's car door opened, and she stepped out with her hands raised, clearly deciding that cooperation was her best option. But her expression as she looked up at the window where Eleanor and Dr. Chen stood was filled with a cold fury that made Eleanor's blood run cold. "She's looking at us like we're the criminals," Eleanor observed. "People like this always believe their victims deserve what happens to them," Dr. Chen replied grimly. "They justify their actions by convincing themselves that their targets are somehow asking for trouble." Backup units arrived within minutes, and Eleanor watched as both Robert and Margaret were taken into custody. But even as she felt relief at seeing them apprehended, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of a much larger revelation. Officer Rivera appeared at the office door, his face serious but relieved. "Ladies, we've got them both in custody, but this investigation is far from over. The Financial Crimes Unit will want to interview you both extensively, and we're going to need to examine all the records you've compiled." Eleanor felt exhausted, but also strangely exhilarated. For the first time in days, she felt like she was fighting back rather than simply reacting to threats. Thunder appeared in the doorway behind Officer Rivera, and Eleanor couldn't help but smile at the horses. "Timing. Thank you," she said to both of them, "for protecting us, for believing me, for not letting them succeed." Thunder stepped closer and nuzzled Eleanor's hand gently. In that moment, she understood that her connection to this remarkable horse was more than coincidental. He had become her guardian angel, appearing at every crucial moment when danger threatened. As they prepared to leave Potomac Heights, Eleanor realized that while Robert and Margaret's arrest was a significant victory, the threatening phone call suggested there were still others involved in the conspiracy. The web of deception was larger than she had initially imagined, and untangling it would require all the courage and determination she could muster. 2 weeks after Robert and Margaret's arrest, Eleanor thought the worst was behind her. The Financial Crimes investigation had uncovered a network spanning 7 senior communities across Maryland and Virginia, with fraudulent schemes totaling over $2 million. Robert Henderson's web of shell companies had been dismantled, and several facility managers who had been taking kickbacks were facing charges. Eleanor had testified before a grand jury, her voice steady and clear as she recounted Dorothy's suspicions and the subsequent attempts to silence her own investigation. Dr. Sarah Chen had become not just an ally, but a genuine friend, their shared experience creating a bond that Eleanor treasured. The two women had even started volunteering together, helping other senior communities audit their financial records to prevent similar schemes. Officer Rivera and Thunder had become regular fixtures in Eleanor's life. Their daily patrols past her Georgetown home had evolved into genuine friendship, with Eleanor often preparing coffee for the officer and carrots for Thunder. The magnificent black horse had proven himself to be more than just a patrol animal. He seemed to possess an almost supernatural ability to sense danger and protect those he cared about. But Eleanor's sense of security was shattered on a bright Tuesday morning in late November. She was preparing to meet Dr. Chen for their weekly review of community financial records when her doorbell rang. Through the peephole, she saw a well-dressed woman in her 50s with perfectly styled blonde hair and an expensive handbag. "Mrs. Thompson," My name is Victoria Henderson. I believe you know my husband, Robert. Eleanor's blood ran cold. Robert's wife had never been part of their interactions, and her sudden appearance felt ominous. Eleanor opened the door, but kept the security chain in place. "What can I do for you, Mrs. Henderson?" Victoria's smile was cold and calculated. "I think we need to have a conversation about the terrible misunderstanding that's led to my husband's arrest. You see, Robert was actually trying to help these senior communities improve their financial management. The money you think was stolen was actually being invested for long-term improvements. Mrs. Henderson, your husband sabotaged my wheelchair and orchestrated attempts to harm me. There's no misunderstanding about that, is there?" Victoria's voice took on a threatening edge. "Because I think an elderly woman living alone might be confused about what she remembers. Memory problems are so common at your age." Eleanor felt a familiar chill of fear, but also a surge of anger. This woman was trying to gaslight her, just as Robert and Margaret had attempted to do. "I remember everything perfectly, Mrs. Henderson, including the evidence that sent your husband to jail." Victoria's facade finally dropped completely. "You stupid old woman. You have no idea what you've destroyed. Robert was supporting dozens of families with his contracting business. Now children will go hungry because of your meddling." "Children will be better off when their father isn't stealing from vulnerable seniors," Eleanor replied firmly. Victoria stepped closer to the door, her voice dropping to a venomous whisper. "This conversation is your last warning. Drop your cooperation with the prosecutors, claim you were confused and misremembered events, or you'll face consequences that make a train platform seem pleasant." Eleanor slammed the door and immediately called Officer Rivera. Her hands were shaking as she explained about Victoria's visit and threats. "Mrs. Thompson, Victoria Henderson has been on our radar. We suspected she was the mastermind behind the operation, but we needed more evidence. Her threatening you directly gives us what we need for an arrest warrant." "How long until you can get here?" "I'm about 10 minutes away with Thunder. Lock your doors and stay away from windows until I arrive." Eleanor did as instructed, but 5 minutes later she heard the distinct sound of her back door being opened. Someone was inside her house, moving quietly but deliberately through the rooms below. Eleanor's heart pounded as she realized Victoria must have gained access somehow, probably through the same methods Robert had used. Eleanor grabbed her cordless phone and wheeled her chair into her bedroom, locking the door behind her. But she could hear footsteps on the stairs now, and the door lock wouldn't hold against someone determined to get inside. Desperately, Eleanor looked out her bedroom window facing the street, hoping to see Officer Rivera approaching. Instead, she saw Victoria's car parked directly in front of her house, and a second vehicle she didn't recognize. Victoria hadn't come alone. The bedroom door handle rattled, and Eleanor knew she had only moments before her sanctuary was breached. In desperation, she opened her window as wide as it would go and shouted for help as loudly as she could manage. Her cry was answered by the thundering sound of hoofbeats approaching at a gallop. Thunder appeared at the end of her street, moving faster than Eleanor had ever seen a horse move through an urban environment. Officer Rivera guided him expertly around parked cars and past startled pedestrians, the horse's powerful stride covering the distance to Eleanor's house in mere seconds. The bedroom door burst open, just as Thunder arrived below Eleanor's window. Victoria Henderson stood in the doorway with wild eyes and disheveled hair, clearly desperate and dangerous. Behind her was a large man Eleanor didn't recognize, probably hired muscle meant to intimidate her into compliance. "Get away from that window," Victoria demanded. "You're coming with us until you agree to recant your testimony." "I'm not going anywhere," Eleanor said, surprised by her own courage. From below, she could hear Officer Rivera's commanding voice. "Metropolitan Police, the building is surrounded." Victoria's companion looked nervous and began backing toward the stairs, but Victoria herself seemed beyond rational thought. "You've destroyed everything," she screamed at Eleanor. "My family's business, our reputation, our future." "Your family's business was built on stealing from elderly people," Eleanor replied, "and making them disappear when they got too close to the truth." The sound of breaking glass came from downstairs, followed by Thunder's distinctive neigh. Officer Rivera was making entry through whatever means necessary. Victoria pulled out her phone and made a frantic call. "The plan has failed. The police are here. Initiate the backup protocol now." Eleanor didn't know what the backup protocol meant, but it sounded ominous. Heavy footsteps were climbing the stairs now, but they were moving away from Eleanor's bedroom, suggesting Officer Rivera had gained control of the situation. "Victoria Henderson, you're under arrest." Officer Rivera's voice echoed through the house, but Victoria had one final card to play. She moved to Eleanor's bedroom window and looked down at Thunder, who was positioned directly below. "That horse has been a problem from the beginning, always showing up at the wrong time, always protecting the wrong people." To Eleanor's horror, Victoria pulled a small device from her pocket that looked like a remote control. "Do you know what happens when a horse gets startled by a loud, sudden noise? They panic, they run, sometimes right into traffic." Eleanor realized with growing dread that Victoria was about to use some kind of noise device to spook Thunder into running into the busy street adjacent to Eleanor's house. The morning traffic was heavy, and a panicked horse would face certain injury or worse. "Don't you dare," Eleanor said, moving her wheelchair between Victoria and the window. "Move aside, old woman." But Eleanor held her ground. "That horse saved my life. I won't let you hurt him." Victoria raised the device, but before she could activate it, Eleanor did something that surprised even herself. She grabbed the small ceramic lamp from her bedside table and threw it as hard as she could at Victoria's hand. Her aim, honed by years of erasing chalkboards from her seated position, was perfect. The device flew from Victoria's grasp and shattered against the bedroom wall just as Officer Rivera burst through the door. Victoria's accomplice was already in handcuffs, and backup officers were securing the rest of the house. "It's over, Victoria," Officer Rivera said, moving swiftly to restrain her. But Victoria's expression held one final surprise. As Officer Rivera placed her under arrest, she looked directly at Eleanor with something resembling respect. "You know what, Mrs. Thompson? I underestimated you. I thought you were just another scared old lady who could be intimidated into silence. But you fought back every step of the way. You protected that horse like he was your own family." Eleanor looked out the window at Thunder, who was calm now, standing in her front yard like a faithful guardian. "He is family. He's been protecting me from the beginning." As Victoria was led away in handcuffs, Officer Rivera helped Eleanor process what had happened. The backup protocol had involved several other accomplices who were being arrested simultaneously across the DC area. The network that had seemed so powerful and untouchable was crumbling rapidly now that their methods had been exposed. Dr. Chen arrived within the hour, having rushed over as soon as she heard about the incident on the police scanner. The three of them sat in Eleanor's living room, surrounded by the evidence of their victory, but still processing the scope of what they had uncovered. The Financial Crimes Unit estimates that Robert and Victoria's operation affected over 300 senior citizens across 8 different communities, Officer Rivera reported. "Your courage in asking questions about Dorothy's accident potentially saved countless other people from becoming victims." Eleanor looked out her front window at Thunder, who was grazing contentedly on her small front lawn. "I couldn't have done any of this without him. Every time I was in danger, Thunder appeared. It's like he knew I needed protection." Horses have incredible instincts about people, Officer Rivera said. Thunder has been in service for 7 years, and I've never seen him respond to a civilian the way he's responded to you. You two have a special connection. As the afternoon progressed and the last of the police paperwork was completed, Eleanor realized how dramatically her life had changed. The quiet, routine existence she had been living since Harold's passing had been replaced by something more meaningful. Her investigation had brought justice for Dorothy and protection for countless other seniors, but it had also connected her with new friends and given her a renewed sense of purpose. Dr. Chen had already proposed that they establish a consulting service to help senior communities protect themselves from similar fraud schemes. We could call it the Dorothy Williams Foundation, she suggested, a way to honor her memory while preventing others from becoming victims. Officer Rivera supported the idea enthusiastically. The Metropolitan Police would be happy to partner with such an organization, and Thunder and I would be honored to provide security consultation. As the sun set over Georgetown that evening, Eleanor sat in her living room with a cup of tea, watching Thunder graze in her front yard. Officer Rivera had arranged for the horse to stay overnight, both for security reasons and because Thunder seemed reluctant to leave Eleanor's side. The events of the past month had tested Eleanor's courage, her faith in human nature, and her physical limits. But they had also revealed strength she hadn't known she possessed and connections she would treasure for the rest of her life. The woman who had been pushed toward train tracks had emerged stronger, braver, and more determined than ever. Her phone rang, and she saw Jessica's number on the caller ID. Her daughter had been calling twice a day since learning about the incidents, desperate to convince Eleanor to move closer to Baltimore where she could keep a better eye on her. "Mom, please tell me you're finally ready to consider moving to that assisted living facility near me," Jessica said as soon as Eleanor answered. Eleanor looked out at Thunder, who had raised his head and was looking directly at her through the window, almost as if he could hear the conversation. "Jessica, darling, I'm exactly where I need to be. Georgetown is my home. Thunder and Officer Rivera are my protectors, and Dr. Chen has become a wonderful friend. I'm not running away from my life. I'm just getting started on a new chapter of it." As she hung up, Eleanor realized that the elderly woman who had felt vulnerable and isolated just weeks ago had become someone entirely different. She was now Eleanor Thompson, senior advocate, fraud investigator, and proud friend to the most courageous horse in Washington, D.C. Thunder whinnied softly from the yard, and Eleanor smiled, knowing that tomorrow would bring new challenges and new opportunities to make a difference in the lives of people who needed protection and advocacy. The ceramic elephant had been returned to its place on her coffee table, no longer just a memento from her past, but a symbol of her survival and transformation. Eleanor Thompson had faced the darkness and emerged into the light, stronger than ever, and ready for whatever adventures lay ahead. Dear listeners, we hope Eleanor's incredible journey of courage and resilience has moved you as deeply as it has moved us. Her story reminds us that strength has no age limit, and that sometimes our greatest protectors come in the most unexpected forms. Just like Thunder appeared when Eleanor needed him most, there are stories of hope and triumph waiting to be discovered all around us. To continue experiencing these powerful tales of human spirit and determination, we've prepared a special playlist filled with equally captivating stories that celebrate the extraordinary courage of ordinary people. You'll find it by clicking to your left. If Eleanor and Thunder's story touched your heart, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Every day we bring you unique stories that explore the complexity and beauty of human experience, proving that heroes can emerge at any age and in any circumstance. We'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below about Eleanor's transformation from victim to victor and how Thunder's loyalty inspired you. Don't miss our upcoming content, where more incredible stories of courage and friendship await. Until next time, remember that like Eleanor Thompson, you have more strength within you than you might realize.